Welcome to the Sound on Sound electronic music podcast. My name is William Stokes, and this episode I'm delighted to welcome a guest who needs almost no introduction, Suzanne Ciani. Suzanne is without a doubt one of the most celebrated synthesists of her or any generation. Over her 5-decade career, she's consistently broken new ground in the world of electronic music and in the wider world of sound design with a litany of achievements to her name. She was the first woman to score a Hollywood film. The Joel Schumacher-directed The Incredible Shrinking Woman. Hers is also the first female human voice to appear in a game, namely the pinball game Xenon, the sounds of which recently got their own vinyl release and which also landed her a well-deserved place in the Pinball Expo Hall of Fame. You'll likely have heard her work in some of the most recognizable commercial sounds of the 20th century. For instance, the Coca-Cola Pop and Pour sound and the Columbia Pictures theme. And did I mention she's also a 5-time Grammy nominee? Hi, Suzanne.
Good morning, or evening, as the case may be.
That was the film. You were hired to score The Incredible Shrinking Woman.
Yes.
In 1980, right?
Right.
Which came out the following year. But am I right in thinking it wouldn't be for another, decade and a half before another woman would be hired?
That's what I discovered kind of randomly because I read the obituary of a woman whose name I always forget, who they said was the first woman, and that was in like 1994.
I actually have that in my notes. It's Shirley Walker.
Oh, thank you, Shirley Walker. Oh, I wish I had met her. But anyway, yeah. And so then I have to say that I did discover a film in the 40s by a woman named Elizabeth Firestone. She was related to the Firestone Tire people. And I don't think anything has been known about her. And I tracked down a copy of the film, kind of a bootleg copy. And yes, she had scored a film in the 40s. So, it's so rare that it's almost, non-existent up until, this current period, historic period, where women have gained a foothold somewhat. That's a story that's been kind of the arc of my lifetime, this whole evolutionary professionalism of women. And it's nice to see. I'm glad that I've lived long enough to see the blossoming of some of the, wishes that we had so long ago and seeing some of the doors open that were closed. And it's, it's just one little part of the whole thing. It's not the main part. It's like saying that, nominating Kamala Harris is because she's a woman. No, it's not. Everybody's very relaxed. Nobody thinks about her gender. At least I don't. And that's what we want. We don't want to have to think about, whether somebody is female, but it's meaningless.
Well, exactly. It's funny, isn't it? Because it is meaningless in one sense, but
yes.
It's in terms of that opportunity for people. There's that amazing. I think it was. This is going to be terrible if anyone listening is in the know. I'm less interested in the size and convulsions of Einstein's brain than I am in the fact that people of equal or greater ability have lived and died in sweatshops and cotton fields. And in a similar kind of way, it's like, the amount of sort of amazing compositional minds that would have been denied the opportunities to contribute to, famous pieces of work.
Yes, the voices that we don't hear. Yes.
So you've got something like, is it sort of 17, 18 studio albums now to your name?
Yes, I can't count them myself. I used to think of them as my children. So I knew, because my mom had 6 children and my albums were like my children. But I don't think my mother would have considered having over 20 children. So it's like become, it's gone out of that realm a little bit and I don't even know their names,
Well, I'm assuming you don't have a favorite. I mean, the most recent one, Golden Apples of the Sun.
Yes.
That was a collaboration with Jonathan Fitoussi, the French musician.
Lovely, yes.
I'm assuming that's a reference to Morton Subotnick's Silver Apples of the Moon.
Well, that happened on multi levels because we decided to include a reading of a poem, and the only poem that I happen to know by heart is the Song of Wandering Angus. And so I just, absentmindedly recited that poem one day. And then afterwards we said, oh my, look at this. I mean, this, maybe we should call the album The Golden Apples of the Sun, because, the recording is right there. It's the first track. And so it fit in on multiple levels. And I think it had meaning on multiple levels because Subotnick really had a breakthrough when that album came out. It was totally unheard of for that type of music to be published. And what was it? None Such, made an opening for him. And it was different. I mean, in a way, we don't know, it was a recorded album. This is a recorded album, but the foundation of my Buchla music is live performance. So I'm not treating this. I've done many studio albums. I've used MIDI and all kinds of tools in the studio, overdubbing and layering and all of that, manipulating, whatever you can do, I've done. But right now I'm focusing on in the moment live performance because I think that was the concept that Don Buchla had when I met him in 1969. So he started in 63 and he invented, this modular electronic music system. And in the beginning, people were thinking of these machines as the sources of sounds. Like, oh my God, it can make sounds that you've never heard before, blah, blah, blah. But in the next 5 years, Don, I think, aspired to the idea of making an actual performance instrument in the tradition of musical instruments. So not just a studio tool, but something that you could interface with and perform. And that's when I met him, when he was starting that concept in his design. And so, that's the important, I don't know if it's important, but that's definitely the angle that I bring to this electronic music. And I think more kids are performing live. You're going to be performing live soon, right?
That's true, yeah. For those, for any listeners unaware, this is at the time of recording, we have just ascertained that Suzanne and I are going to be performing at the same festival, Hidden Notes Festival. Yeah, you took a break, didn't you, took a break. You didn't perform with the Buchla system for some time. And am I right in thinking, I feel like this is mythologized now, but am I right in thinking it's because as simple as a reason is that your 200 system broke?
Yes. Also, there was, when I came to New York in 1974, I came to New York to do a performance. I played a quadraphonic concert at the Bonino Gallery. And that particular concert, by the way, we discovered a cassette tape. And it's been released now on Finders Keepers. So it's not in quad, obviously, but it is a document. And so my ambition in New York, I decided to stay in New York. My ambition was to perform live and to get a career going of being a performer on the Buchla. And I actually found an agent, and I had a concert planned in Lincoln Center at Avery Fisher Hall. And I went in to speak for pre-production, and I told them where to put the additional 2 speakers for quad. And they said no. And for me, that was non-negotiable. I played in quad. And that was a real stumbling block. So I couldn't get the venue, the situation, beyond a certain, loft. I played at Phil Niblock's loft. I played at the radio station, but that was, of course, broadcast in stereo. So I hit a roadblock in terms of the theaters. I worked for a couple of years trying to get, I started a corporation, a 501c3, so that people would foster, new concepts in theaters. And because they were redesigning Avery Fisher Hall, I wanted it as a quadraphonic place. Anyway, I'm going on and on. But that was a part of it. I couldn't find the venues. Number two, the system broke down. Don Buchla came to New York. He met with my friend, John Warham, who was the president of the Audio Engineering Society. And the fact is, if John couldn't fix it, and he didn't know anybody who could fix it, it couldn't be fixed. And to send it back to the West Coast to be fixed, and then to have it come back and be damaged in that trip was kind of, useless. And then the other thing was that half of it was stolen. So the person who stole it, I don't know if he's out there listening, but I want him to know.
I hope you're listening.
I hope you're listening because, I don't know if people know the impact of some of their seemingly, unconscious interventions in real life on other people, but there can be grave consequences. So anyway, all those things, those three issues really worked against my doing live Buchla. And then, of course, the whole electronic music scene was growing and burgeoning and changing, and the Japanese were coming in, and I just became a studio mouse. I synclaviers and Fairlights and sequential circuits and Rolands and CS80s and all the DX7 and the drum machines and I was a happy camper playing with all those toys.
I mean, it's interesting in the gear that you just listed there. That sounds like it was a move away from modular altogether.
It was, but my approach was never, even though I was a pianist, my approach was never piano. I'd had too much, I studied computer music with John Chowning and Max Matthews. And, Chowning is now 90 years old. And he was the father of FM synthesis. And having studied with him, I was a fearless programmer. I mean, DX7 came and I made a whole package of sounds for it for them. So programming was my nature. I loved to get in. I didn't build the machines. I certainly didn't design them, but I could interact with them and use them, and that's what I liked. Yeah. I thought that sounds, when sampling came in, I had a synclavier, which was a $200,000, digital, New England Digital Instruments. And it could sample, but I only used that for my commercial work. So there were a lot of things that were appropriate and cool and wonderful tools for making money, sound design. But my personal music didn't use those. My personal music was still a lot of hands-off programming, using the MC8, the Roland MC8, the MC4, the first sequencer that Dave Smith made, the 800. And, it was just joyous to use these things. They're more joyous even than it is now. I don't know. My sequencer now is in a little, module. Yeah.
I mean, I'm really interested to ask, and this is a very rudimentary question, or prosaic question at least. What is it about Buchla that you love so much?
Well, I was just, it's by happenstance that I landed right in, Berkeley, where he was living right next door in Oakland, and that I worked for him. So I was kind of, proselytized by him in the beginning, and that's what I knew.
So it was your formative experience really was in that fold.
Yes, but I also had exposure from the beginning to the Moog 15, because the Mills College Tape Music Center, which was the San Francisco Tape Music Center housed at Mills College, had a Moog, and they gave it to me for one summer. And, the Moog had a wonderful sound, but it wasn't relatable in the same way that a Buchla was. From the beginning, the Buchla, because he wanted to make a performance instrument, was a machine that talked back to you, that you could relate to. So it had a lot of blinking lights that told you what was going on. It had a different convention of patching. So there were, distinctions between control voltages and audio voltages. The Moog was just 1/4-inch plugs. The Buchla was compact and small. The Buchla was spatial. It was quadraphonic. It was just, it was like the Maserati of instruments, and I did, toy with the Moog, but the Moog really became a keyboard instrument. It was adopted by rock bands, who wanted to cut through and compete with guitars. And I never thought of it as the whole idea that it's all about the sound. It's not about the sound. I mean, yes, the sound is different, and the sound can be, manipulated and changed and designed. But for me, it was always about the way I could interact with it live, and the movement of the sound, the way the sound moved. So I understand you do a little quad as well. So, the sound, the sound should move, right? I mean, what is it doing?
Yeah.
It's a monophonic sound that has no space of its own. But once it's coming out through speakers, it can come out of 4 as easily as 1. And then you can use the voltages. Or LFOs, as you say, to modulate the space.
It's funny because I think for me, the one of the fundamental differences between the sort of the approaches that you've been talking about is it feels like there was and I'm interested to hear your response to this. I get the sense that while Moog was appealing to people who were already kind of considered very musical, it was as if the Buchla approach was about almost creating a new type of musician entirely, a new way of thinking about music, where people who maybe previously didn't even consider themselves instrumentalists suddenly became instrumentalists, suddenly became experts in a new discipline of a new way of performing music. Whereas it feels like there was the East Coast approach. It feels like, interestingly, in recent years, there's been much more talk of the sort of East and West Coast, lots of designs coming out that are combining elements of both of those things. But it feels like the East Coast approach has always sort of fit into a vocabulary that already existed, whereas sort of the West Coast, Don Buchla's designs seem to have been sort of interested in just precipitating a new approach entirely.
Well, yeah. I mean, basically what you're talking about is the keyboard. I mean, Don always said that the mechanical keyboard was an inappropriate interface. And truly, if you think about it, the fact that key presses down and is that it's just a switch closure, really. It's not hitting a hammer, and the hammer is not hitting a string. So unless you wanted to carry forward the languaging and the vocabulary of a different instrument, namely the piano, then you had to consider, and Buchla did consider, he was a thinker, and he would go back to the very essence. He just would go deeper and deeper. What is a hand? How big is a hand? How can you use it? So there were all these basic questions that he asked, and he developed interfaces that were just not seen before, the Thunder and Lightning, the Marimba Lumina, this flat keyboard that it's not even, touch plate. So that was different. But for me, the big thing, because, what music are you playing? If you're playing a melody on a keyboard, then you want a keyboard and you want to play a melody. If you're looking at composition and the organization of your notes or your sounds as voltage controlled, then you're looking at a different palette. You're not looking at a single trigger for a single event. You're looking at the shape and type of control voltage that's going to express some compositional piece of architecture, and it's powerful. You're not limited by your manual dexterity by any means. I mean, you've got electricity at your,
As you're talking, I think of the shape of, for example, the 223 multi-dimensional kinesthetic input, which this isn't a My Life in Modules episode, but we did talk before this interview about some of your take homes, and that was one of them. That is that amazing kind of falcon shape capacitive controller. I can't but have that in my head the entire time you're talking about all of this, that completely different geography. And I'm sure you can't either.
Yes. But, the other things that Buchla, there were so many the use of random voltages. He has modules that can refine, people think of random as chaos. Oh my God, what's going to happen? I don't know. But for Buchla, it was very well designed, within parameters. So how random? What are they, when is it random? You can integrate it with the rhythm of the music, blah, blah, blah. And so it's a very refined use of a non-literal approach to sound. And I use random I couldn't live without it. So that's a Buchla thing. I know we're not talking about modules, but I'm still trying to get people to look at the MARF, the multiple arbitrary function generator. And
let's talk about that a little bit, because it's again one of the larger format Buchla modules. It's a kind of it's a mainstay, isn't it? It's a real classic.
Yes. I can't perform without it. Although I did. When I first came back, I was using the 200E system, complete 200E. And there was a module called the 250, as opposed to this one, which is the 248. The 248, the one that I grew up on, didn't exist. And the 250, I considered to be, to some degree, non-performable. Now, why? Because when you're changing the switches, say the octave switches, if you have them tuned to be octaves, you couldn't address any particular octave independently. You had to cycle through all the octaves. That is not useful. So it's and it couldn't be tuned. It just couldn't be tuned. So I got, that was something that had to be cloned. And, it's a wild jungle out there, I have 3 of them and they're all different. And what can you do? So whatever. So, yeah.
The design of them feels like they accommodate that level of, let's call it, inconsistency. The character you were just saying earlier about how it feels like the machine is speaking back to you. But the character of having sort of things that vary a little bit clone to clone or, unit to unit even feels very alive.
No, it's horrible.
That's what I meant. What did I say? Alive? No, I meant terrible.
I don't know. I mean, I do, learn to, part of the job is to just see what the machine wants to do or can do. You can't impose your will beyond what it wants to do. So you have to come to an agreement. It's a compromise to play one of these, but you can only compromise so much. So when the 250 could not be tuned, and I lost a year of my life trying to tune it, I called it crazy making. I think I needed to be like hospitalized. I just you move the top and the bottom moves. You move the bottom and the top moves. And you're just like a little, hamster.
With a tiny screwdriver or something as well, trying to, on the trimmer. We've all been there.
Oh, yeah, I wish. No, I had an engineer here, Moog. I love Moog now. They're responsible for my comeback to the Buchla. Buchla's responsible also, but, my first concert was for Moog, for Moogfest. And
where you received the Innovation Award.
Eventually,
right?
Yeah, not right away, but I did receive the Innovation Award. Yeah. We became, the old days of East West and that dichotomy was gone. I mean, we're all older and appreciate what's going on, period, and what we have in common. That's a good sign. But anyway, Moog loaned me an engineer for a year to help me.
Wow.
Yeah, because I couldn't get the MARF. I couldn't get the 250, to tune, and neither could he. So
I'm interested to know what he said to that. Well, I told you so.
Well, what Buchla said, I said, Don, this comodule will not tune. And I think he thought at first that I just didn't know how to tune it. Come on over. Let's look at it together. Okay. And, because I had moved back to California, so I'm here. And I bring it over there, and he looks at me after like a half an hour and says, yeah, you're right, it doesn't tune. I said, well, what can we do? He said, well, do something else. Do something else. Forget about your musical concepts of pitch. But
how did you react to that? I mean, what a thing to say.
Yeah, part of it, the philosophy of dealing with this is to be open and flexible and accommodating. You're collaborating with a machine. So you need a little bit of that kind of willingness to play on its terms as well. But certain things are, non-negotiable. And so, I had to go find a solution. And that was when the clone, I found Roman Filippov. Boy, do you know him?
No, I don't actually.
Oh my God, what a dark, it was like going into Darth Vader territory. There were all these subcultures in this area, all these little groups of people with their fanatic, loyalties to certain things. And one of them was the MARF. So there was a group of MARF people. And I went on the website, and that was my introduction to Roman. He was portrayed as this black head mask, just no features at all, just this like Darth Vader. And you could ask questions, but you didn't know if he'd ever answer. It was just so dark and mysterious. Eventually, I met Roman, and he wasn't at all threatening. A lovely Russian fellow. But still difficult. Engineers can be difficult. Anyway.
I don't know what you're talking about. I think that, that's one of the really special things about this corner of history of music is the way that it's empowered people to almost come to the aid of the wider community, without sort of generalizing too much. It feels like there is this sense almost of altruism that comes out in people. Like I really want to see this work for you. I really want to see this side of music progress for everyone, for everyone's sake. And it's funny that we were talking about Spatial, and that seems to me a frontier that now is enjoying a similar kind of attitude. It feels like there are different factions, aren't there? We've got, D&B Soundscape and Dolby Atmos and L Acoustic and everything. But sure, these are competitors, just like Moog and Buchla were competitors. But at the same time, people are willing each other on to succeed, it seems to me, because ultimately it's about the experience of music in the most immersive and enjoyable and meaningful way possible. Without speaking in too many platitudes, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Do you feel that?
Here are my thoughts. I know we're having a resurgence of interest in spatial sound. I mean, we did have quad LPs and an interest in the 70s. But the problem was, back then, there was no content. And I think we're having the same issue right now. So we have a lot of platforms, and those platforms are conduits, really, for delivering spatial music. And that's wonderful that we have those. But actually creating spatial music is another animal. Think of two different categories. One is placement of sound, and the other is movement of sound. So anybody can place a sound and say, okay, I want this there, I want that there. But in electronic music, we have the power to move sound. And it can be done in very sophisticated ways. It's just a natural part of the sound. It's the same control voltage that's operating on all the other parameters of the sound, and then you apply it to space. I don't think we have enough tools right now still for the control voltage manipulation of space. The other thing that we had in the day was voltage-controlled reverb. So part of space is not just the placement in a 360-degree field, but whether it's near or far. So if a sound is dry, it seems to be close to you. If it's reverbed, it's far away. So that was another parameter that we could control with voltage back then. We had a voltage-controlled spring reverb. I still can't do that today. I've made up a kind of workaround with Northern Lights, did a modification of the H9, the Eventide H9, and I can put a control voltage on the mix, but it's not very responsive. It's I don't know why. I mean, somebody could tell me, I'm sure, but so, and then getting these things into those formats. Can you get it into Atmos? Can you get it into I've played with L Acoustics. They're wonderful, sound systems. I give them quad and they dial it up, and that aspect of being able to dial up is fundamental. It's wonderful.
Do you see the use of spatial, or at least quads, as kind of essential to your practice as an electronic musician?
Well, I don't play without it. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because because the movement of the sound is just it's fundamental. I don't know how to play a sound that doesn't move. It's all connected. I wish, honestly, when I'm performing and I am moving the sound, there are certain limitations. Live performance has limitations anyway. You're not dialing in something specific and then recording it, and it's live. So what do I have? I have, for movement of sound, I have a little custom sequencer that I had made, which has a slope function, so the sound can move smoothly, or it can move very kind of rhythmically. So you can take a sustained sound and move it rhythmically, and it has a rhythm, right? So spatial movement is rhythm. You can't move a sound without creating some kind of rhythm. So I use that, and then I use a couple of different voltages. I use envelopes, smooth cycling envelopes to move the sound, and I use random voltages to move the sound because it's psychologically, it's a different feeling. If something's lulling you into calmness with this circular motion, and then all of a sudden the energy picks up and it starts to get, jumpy and unpredictable, that's part of the emotion of the music.
Magic, of course.
Yeah.
There's something very direct. It's a very direct experience of sound.
Yes.
Which is in many ways, that's one thing that we love, isn't it, about electronic music or synthesizer music in general, is in many ways it's devoid of association. We listen to a violin and we say, well, that's abstract, but it sounds like a violin. But actually, it's very difficult to say what a synthesizer sounds like. In fact, a synthesizer doesn't sound like anything.
Yeah, well, I don't think you'd mistake it for a violin, but
that's true. But it's a very kind of, for me, it's one thing that I find very special about it is the way that it seems esoteric to a lot of people. However, the type of interaction with the music that it precipitates is actually incredibly instinctive and very natural and abstract, and requires almost no context at all.
I just did a talk I played a concert at KQED, our local, radio station. And John Chowning was with me that evening, the man from Stanford who invented FM that's used in the DX7 and on and on and on. And he played a 10-minute piece that was, for him, he did it, I think, in 1972. And of course, the sound was moving. How can you make an electronic sound and just sit there and listen to it? It has to have that expression of movement. And I thought, wow, this is really sophisticated. The movement that he designed, because it was so, designed, right, was very elaborate and specific and amazing. The space that I create is not that specific because I don't have the tools to, map a particular movement to everything. Mine is more about, the rhythmic movement of the sound as integrated into the performance. I don't know. Is this making any sense at all? Anyway, there's
absolutely no. Yeah. It is. It's really interesting hearing about the way that you equate. What I'm hearing is the way that you are. You're talking about the intersection between space and time. It seems to me, because a lot of sequencing and when we talk about, for example, function generation, we're talking in the time domain. But it's interesting to hear the way that you are actually thinking of it in the spatial domain at the same time. You said before, when you are making a sound move, you're creating rhythm, which is actually it's not a way that a lot of people instinctively think about movement of sound. If you think about, for example, a left-to-right speaker setup, stereo speaker setup, and you have a sound that pans from left to right and left to right, well, you're actually creating a kind of walking rhythm, right? But we don't seem to kind of think of it in those terms naturally. So it's really interesting to hear the way that it makes a lot of sense to why you've instinctively gone towards quads as a kind of, it's a space domain that's paired with a time domain almost, intrinsically. Is that fair to say?
I love the sound of that. It sounds like Einstein,
It's interesting, actually, I was interviewing Will Gregory a while ago, and he was talking about how he loved the idea of when you're playing with electronic music, you're playing with atoms, you're playing with electrons. You're already plugging in. I think he called it plugging into the universe, which I love as an idea. And I know I've got it in my notes here as well. There's an interview where you called Don Buchla the Leonardo da Vinci of instrument design.
Yes.
Which, okay, some people might go, well, you mean genius. What I hear when I hear that line is that there's someone who is, Leonardo da Vinci was a mathematician, but he also painted.
Yes.
And there's this kind of like art and science and machinery and creativity all coming together.
Yes. Well said. Well said. Yeah.
And that's kind of the Einstein thing as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well, I think, we're starting to assimilate time as a dimension. I guess we were just stuck in 3 for a while. Now I think we're very comfortable in 4 dimensions. But I know because my brother-in-law is a string theorist and, they're dealing in like 30 dimensions. I mean, I'm just like, I'm not.
Yeah, their modular systems are huge.
Yeah, right. I'm not ready for that. But yeah, time, I just saw it this morning and my little kitty is getting white hair, and it's like time it's just, it's there. It's a definite parameter in everything.
And speaking of time and the future, can we expect another album any point soon?
Well, I've been touring now for 10 years or so, and I have been recording my stuff. I haven't been releasing it because, I only release in quad. I let other people release. There are a couple of, in stereo, but on my label, I have to do quad. It's a commitment. So it's kind of a hassle. That's why I haven't done more. I could release just digitally, and we are going to do that. So I did a concert in Amsterdam with the orchestra, the Metropole Orchestra. Do you know that? Okay, so it's Amsterdam Dance Event. And I played live with their orchestra, and it was a phenomenal experience for me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was something. And we've been trying to get this thing mastered. It turned out to be a double LP. It was ridiculously expensive in quad, right? So I think what we're going to do is a digital release soon.
Okay.
Yeah. So that one will come out just digitally, which is, I know people like vinyl. And then I want to release a concert I did in China.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, on vinyl. So we're still doing vinyl. Yeah.
Exciting. That's so exciting. Suzanne Ciani, thank you so much for joining me. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, Will.
And thank you for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all the other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the soundonsound.com/podcasts website page, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels. My name is William Stokes, and this has been a production for Sound on Sound magazine.